thank you, Lynn, for the opportunity to speak today. I feel honored to be speaking to members of the Washington State University community and those of you who may be from outside the community who are here, outside the WSU community who are here. This is the first, as Lynn Foster said, of the research forums that we're going to be doing in the College of Education. And the fact that I'm talking about doping in sport probably is of great interest to many of you today because you're going to be, many of you are going to be working in movement studies in some form, maybe athletic trainers, physical therapists. Some of you may go into medicine. Some of you may work with physical education teachers. Some of you may be strength teachers. Some of you may just be out in the greater community in some other facet. What I'm going to talk to you about today will reach probably everybody in this room and beyond, because the issue that we're talking about in terms of doping in sport is much greater than sport itself. And I've had the dubious distinction at times of working in an area called sport ethics. And most of you would think sport ethics is an oxymoron, sport and ethics. It's kind of like working for the CIA. My colleagues and I were hired by President Clinton and John Deutsch to work for the CIA in ethics. And as you know, Clinton and John Deutsch both had their issues dealing with ethics. And so it was a very interesting place in which to work. And we've had an opportunity to work with the American Bar Association and work in competition because the bar is all about competition. And they have to deal with law on one side, and then they have to deal with their clients on another. So they have to have very, very weighty issues in terms of what's going on. And the work that I've been involved with has been going on now with us for 20 years. And I'm going to give you a little background into an area called moral reasoning and how I got into it to lead to what this whole issue is about doping today. I was an intercollegiate athlete. I worked at University of Idaho as an athlete and went to school there, and I played tennis, went to nationals, and we were the first team that had an opportunity to go to nationals out of any teams at University of Idaho at the time. And this is a long time ago. It was way before most of you were born. And then I also had an opportunity to play field hockey. And when I went back to do my doctorate in the late 80s, there was another colleague of mine from Ewha Women's University in Korea, and she wanted to know, were athletes reasoned from a different, did they reason from a different perspective? Is there something about athletes that they are less morally reasoned, less able to make good moral decisions compared to other populations? And at the time, none of us really knew. There was some research out there, but it wasn't a great amount of research out there. And what had been done, most of it was done with younger populations and not with intercollegiate or professional athletes. So we began this long-term journey in this area and started looking at moral reasoning. And we tried to see, well, what is it about being an athlete that makes us maybe a little bit different than other populations in terms of how we think and we reason? And are there things that we do in sport that are acceptable in sport, but maybe they're not acceptable out in society, but it's a part of the ethos of sport itself? And what I found out was that how I played tennis made me very different than how I played field hockey. That in tennis, the ethos of tennis was about sportsmanship. We made our own calls. But when we went on the field to play field hockey, I would turn around and I'd have a tendency, because I was not a greatly skilled field hockey player, I would have a tendency to go for people's feet and pull their feet out from underneath me because they would fake me out of their socks and they'd go past and I'd lunge and get their feet instead of the ball. And they go down, I get carded and kicked out of the game and that type of thing. But there was something about how I played there that I would never do when it came to tennis. So we began on this journey looking at it to see, is there something that was different? And as we went through this journey, we looked at the notion of character. Because throughout the history of sport, we said sport builds character. But there hasn't been a lot of research that says that it actually truly does build character, or whether it molds character, or whether it makes you become a character. And so when we look at this notion about character, what we began examining was the notion that character is learned, and that we can learn it based on a set of principles. And as we look at those particular principles, people would come to us and they would say, well, whose principles are you talking about? Whose values are you talking about? We turn around and say, your values. And here in the United States, the values that we're talking about are the values that are central to the United States Constitution and the Bill of Rights. They're the notions of honorable behavior, fair and responsible behavior. When we look at those, we're basing our work off of those kinds of concepts. We also believe that character has a definitive cognitive process, that if it is taught, we can actually measure it. So my area of expertise is in measurement. And I'm not going to put lots of numbers up there on the screen because when I teach statistics and I talk numbers, everybody's eyes roll back. So I'm going to try to talk to you about, in general, what we found with this research, what it means, and how that influences what may be happening in Adobe culture today. We began by developing an instrument. It took us 5 years to do it. It's called the Humboldt Values Choice Inventory. It's now the gold standard in the world today. It's been translated into 6 different languages. It has very strong psychometric properties about it, which is the way in which we see whether it's measuring what it's supposed to measure consistently over time. And it's based in a theoretical construct of moral philosophy, which is our background, in the work by Rawls, Frank, and then also it's based in psychological theory. So this is the work that would involve Kohlberg and many of the cognitive developmental theorists, and some work that is in the area of Bandura. What we know in the 20 years we've been measuring athletes' moral reasoning is that athletes use significantly less numbers of principles in terms of how they make their decisions. So they're less principled in making moral decisions. We have approximately 85,000, 90,000 individuals from all over the world in all levels of sport. It doesn't matter whether we're talking about athletes that are from a school with a Christian mission and focus, whether we have just a general university such as WSU, whether we have a small college, a Division III college, Division II, a Division I, an NAIA, any of the junior colleges, and the high schools. We see that athletes use a very different perspective in terms of how they reason. Over the years, we've been able to work with populations in law, populations in business, and we find the same thing. That when we talk about people in highly competitive endeavors, they use a very different level of reasoning and a different perspective than the general population. We know that team sport athletes are more effective than individual sport athletes. And we also know that women score significantly higher and have on every single study out of that 85 or 90,000, except for one study of 100 athletes. And there might be some reasons for why it was in that particular one. It might have been an abnormal population of athletes relative to this other group. You would think so when you have that large of a difference in terms of the reasoning across all the other studies. But we also know, because we can track, we have women scoring significantly lower than they did 20 years ago. And for those of you who were not old enough to know this, but the NCAA has offered championships in, I think, 1980, and that's for women, and that's when we started to see many of these changes occurring with women over time. We used to be a part of the American Association of Intercollegiate Athletics, AIAW. So we're now watching these women, and the team sport women, their scores are actually going down. They're looking more like the men than what we would hope they would be. Our latest studies, which involves about 36 high schools from throughout the country, it involves major Division I football programs such as University of Georgia, who have been working with us now for 7 years, 6 years. The Atlanta Braves our baseball team, Atlanta Braves. What we know is that moral reasoning scores to start with are the lowest we've ever seen in 20 years. You almost can't score any lower on this instrument. And that is very different than what it was 20 years ago. We have these young athletes.